I want you to think today primarily about the difference between one day and the next. In the focus moment, I talked about those things we pulled out of the wardrobe on the third floor at my parents' home when I was a kid. My dad's sailor midi and his hat and those skinny pants. I have no idea how he ever got into them. And we used to play with those things, although once I found out I couldn't wear the midi or the pants to high school in grade 9 because they didn't fit. I don't think I pulled them out again after that. But he, like so many others, signed up and went over there. And it's so hard for people of my generation and younger to really get their heads around what on earth they were thinking. I mean, honestly, they could die over there. What would make you put on a uniform and climb aboard a ship, particularly if you'd never been on one before, and vomit your way over to the other side of the Atlantic Ocean in order to take part in some war that you really weren't a part of? The country to the south of us didn't do what so many people in this country did, waiting until its own democracy was under attack. But we went. I mean, I know that there's that bond between us and England was at war, and so we needed to go. But what changes a person's heart enough that they're willing to do that, to go over there in the hundreds of thousands to fight a war? And it happened not just in the Second World War, but the First World War, when the situation was even more dire, when the realities were horrific. When Scott and I were on holidays, we were in a little bookstore, and it had this whole series of books for children that were called You Wouldn't Want to Be. And you wouldn't want to have had to build the Great Wall of China. And it would tell you what the lifestyle was like back then. And you wouldn't want to, have been around in Napoleon's time, or you wouldn't have wanted to be a crusader. All of those things with the realities of life. Well, think of the realities of life in a trench in the First World War. I mean, what would make you put on a uniform and go over there if you weren't absolutely told you had to get there? I think, as I've paid attention to some of the things that have been coming forward in the news this week, and one of the things that I neglected to raise in the sharing time is the realities that the Ford family are experiencing this week. I know that the City Council and the city, and there's a lot of fodder out there, but as Hazel and I reflected on this morning on our way here, a family's life is in turmoil and tragedy, and so we hold them in our hearts. But in amongst the news that was almost entirely about that debacle was stuff leading up to tomorrow, up to the remembrance of tomorrow, to November 11th, a day of peace in the First World War that was carried over through the subsequent wars that we have been involved in, and that calls us to remember that we can bring about peace, that it is a costly peace, that we lose thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people in the process, millions, but that we can bring it about. And in those news things, one piece came to mind that answered that question that I posed in the focus moment a couple of days after I'd written the focus moment. And it was a piece of news about November 9th, 1938. And the difference between November 9th, 1938 and November 10th, 1938. An evening that happened 75 years ago yesterday. And the difference that happened on that evening that made such a difference between November 9th and November 10th wasn't anticipated. I mean, on November 9th, people knew that things weren't really good, that there was stuff happening. There'd been some news coming out of Europe that suggested that not all the countries that butted up against one another were happy with their relationships. People were being denied access, denied the right to move from one country to another, and that was disturbing because we take our freedoms for granted. We have passports that let us go from one place to another. If we don't have a passport, we can't go, but most of us can get passports as long as we're not selling national secrets, Edward Snowden being deprived of his. But most of us know that we could get a passport and move from one place to another, and that was the same in 1938 on November 9th. Most people had the freedom to move from one place to another, even in that kind of little bit antsy Europe of that time. But things were changing in Germany, and some of that ability to move around was being denied. And it so happened that a couple who had sought to leave Germany to go to Poland were denied the right to leave because they were Jewish. Their son, who lived in Paris, was perturbed that his family had been insulted and delayed in this manner. So perturbed that he took it upon himself to purchase a gun, to go to the German embassy, demand to see someone. And when he was given access to a German diplomat there, he shot him several times and killed him. That hadn't happened on November 9th. It had happened a little bit before that. But the reality was that when that happened, it set in place, it crystallized this entire plan so that come November 9th, orders were in place. And the switch of a system was about to flip. Standing aside because they had been advised not to intervene, soldiers, or the police, watched as soldiers, encouraged and added to by civilians, destroyed any Jewish synagogue, place of business, killed thousands of Jews, and rounded up more. The news that came out of that night was shocking and appalling, and it hit the newspapers around the world, saying that it didn't matter how much you might want to try to say, we know things are rough, but nothing's really going to happen. The night of November 9th, 1938 made it clear that things were going to happen. No matter how much you could say, look, people can't wipe out an entire group of people. Come on. The night of November 9th, 1938 showed that, people would have that on the agenda. As much as it was sort of, even if things go bad in Germany, people will respond. We'll get those who are in trouble out. We can save people. That night, November 9th, 1938, showed that you wouldn't be able to move fast enough to save people. And so on November 10th, it was a very different world. And it was the kind of world that my dad and your dads and your moms lived in and picked up and decided that they needed to do something about. It was slow in coming, and we didn't do what we needed to do. We still neglected to open our borders and allow people who needed refuge to come pouring into our land. We, in fact, one of the greatest blights on our record, turned away a boat filled with people who had nowhere to go. We decided that it would be business as usual. We had our quotas. We knew who we would invite in, and we certainly weren't going to stop that. But we didn't actually go far enough. So even though the night of November 9th, 1938 changed what was going on in the individual hearts of people who read the reports and saw the pictures and heard what was going on over their wireless, were astonished by what was happening. Even though those individual hearts put on those uniforms, got on the ships, vomited their way across the Atlantic, and gave their lives, their energy, their time, their youth to that. We didn't get it on a corporate, on a national level. We weren't able to get that passion that the individuals had to infiltrate the policies of the government and so be able to save the lives of so many more people than we were able to save. So here we are, Sunday, November 10th, 2013. And each one of us could go to last night's newspaper or the internet and find some story that was posted there, not something fictitious that somebody with a rant wanted to get up there, but a news story about something so horrific that it would turn your stomach, something so horrible that you would wish you had not seen that. We can all find those things. Heck, we look at them almost every day, and we wish we didn't see them. And they change us. They do, they change us. We look at the world differently. Some of us are so cynical about what might possibly happen in the world because we read too much of that stuff that we just kind of shudder ourselves and we don't want to know. So we avoid it. But the reality is that hearts have been changed and moved so many times before, and we have engaged in those conversations so many times before. We have given our lives in so many fights and altercations that I can't even number them for you. And they go on around the world in incredible numbers right now. But we aren't enough. And that's the truth. Stirring my heart, stirring my dad's heart to get on a ship and go over there, it helped. We won the war. We wouldn't be existing in a country that is as free as it is now if we hadn't had parents and relatives and uncles and aunts and friends who did that for us, made that choice based on what happened in their heart. So it was a gift. But we need to do not just the work of changing our hearts. I know your hearts are there. I know you know the cost. I know your families know it. I know that on November 11th, you'll all remember it. The couple of lines in one of the songs, and hearts are strong again. That song moves me every time because it is the strengthening of our hearts. But it's not just the strengthening of our hearts. It's also the moving of those huge institutions that care for us, that make the decisions, that open the doors and allow in those whose lives are threatened, that allow peace to break out. And so tomorrow, as you are moved by what happens, wherever you are, at 11 o'clock tomorrow morning, as you are moved by that, remember too that you are part of a nation that must be changed, touched, moved as much as your heart is. I know your heart will be. And finding ways that we can do that so that the never again is really never again and not just, okay, just this once. And we can look to those places in the world that are in need now, as we didn't do so many times since never again, with Rwanda, and now Syria, with Yugoslavia. We've got so many different stories to which our response has not been sufficient. Let your heart lead you to that conversation wherever you might find opportunity to have it. Let your heart which is touched and changed and moved by those sacrifices that have been made, let your heart take you to conversations that make sure that our doors are always open, so that those who on November 10th believed that they would make a difference, believed that their countries would open their doors and spare a people, so that those hearts are carried forward in yours. And we make sure that our country is one that stands strong in the face of evil and opens its doors so that it might be overcome. Thank you.